Hello, I am joined by Kate Rybcznski. She is a part of the economics department. We will be asking her some questions today to get to know her a little bit better. So I will just jump right into the first question. So Kate, what initially sparked your interest in economics as a topic?
Well, initially, I was studying international relations with that universal aim of world peace. And it was during Professor Julia Devlin's course on economics of the Middle East that I realized much conflict was centered around economic motivations. Who gets what resources? Not only how resources are allocated, but how they are treated as well. And what I mean by how they are treated is along the lines of the tragedy of the commons, where if we have a shared resource, such as a grazing field in the initial example, without any coordination among users or rules of use, the resource may become overused or mismanaged. So, for example, overgrazing. In the context of our global resources, what one group does upstream affects the downstream neighbors. So, for example, polluted waterways. So, anyway, in order to figure out effective ways to reduce conflict, I decided to study economics. After that, of course, I quickly became interested in other issues within economics, primarily focused on the labor market in areas such as gender gaps, policy, and well being.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And we'll just move right on to the next question. What initially drew you to the University of Waterloo?
Well, I was actually interested in Waterloo for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest was that the econ department had Professor Fadl Nakib, whose research focus included economics of the Middle East, which was one of my initial inspirations. Outside of economics, it also had breadth of study in Arab culture.
Awesome. And on a similar note, what would you say is something that you really enjoy about your position at the university?
I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to do research on issues that are important to me, especially those that focus on gender equity, policy, and general well being, particularly for people experiencing discrimination or high barriers, and so forth.
What would you say is something that you are extremely passionate about?
I'm very passionate about happiness and well being of individuals. I'm passionate about equity. I'm passionate about these end goals of research to address critical issues in our world through truth seeking research, careful analysis of available data and information. And in order to develop useful policy that successfully improves conditions, I believe, and I'm passionate about this, getting a good understanding of what the issues are, what mechanisms and behavior create these issues, and how these mechanisms and behaviors might change under different policies. And I'm also passionate about recognizing that there's no one size fits all solution, and that if we are to improve conditions, all policies will have advantages and disadvantages that need to be acknowledged. And sometimes this means we need a multi pronged approach, multiple policies working in tandem to address issues. And of course, there's no perfect tool or method of analysis that will best understand these critical issues. Indeed, I passionately support the strength that we gain from looking at issues from multiple lenses and using multiple tools and approaches from different disciplines and from within economics as well. So for me, it's really exciting to consider what each approach brings to the table, and important also to acknowledge the limitations of each tool, method, or approach.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on to the next question, when you get the time to have some free time, what would you say is your go-to activity?
Well, I like to do so many things, including my work, that there's never enough time. So enough free time is never enough. Um, but so in my free time, in good weather and locations, I love to hike. So when I travel, I'm often looking for great hiking spots. I also enjoy gardening, climbing, anti gravity yoga, and sailing. I've been crewing with my dad for races in the Toronto Harbor. In the winter, I'm more likely to curl up with a good book. And I'm usually always singing when doing chores at home. But during my free time, I also like to take out the guitar, ukulele, and
Are there any projects that you are currently working on that you would like to share some information about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently working on two projects that look at the implications of childbirth and caregiving on women's labor market outcomes. So one project focuses on the implications of mompreneurship. So that's entrepreneurial ventures of recent mothers. So we're looking at the implications of mompreneurship on subsequent labor market outcomes. And we're finding that while entrepreneurial experience doesn't seem to affect mothers' wages relative to being not employed after the birth of a child, but it does increase the probability that the mother will be employed in the longer term, which of course has implications on the mother's ability to earn and the well-being of both the mother and the child. So that is using German data with international co-authors. A second project I have is working with Canadian data with Canadian co-authors. And we're looking at the impact of childbirth and caregiving on immigrant versus non-immigrant lifetime income trajectories. And we find that immigrant women's earnings trajectories are substantially different from non-immigrant women, and that these differences are significantly impacted by education and age at arrival in Canada. And these can affect the impact that childbirth or caregiving have for the immigrant versus non-immigrant earnings trajectory differences. Both of these projects are really early stages, but I'm really excited to dig deeper into the mechanisms as well as the diversity of outcomes for women.
And that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for joining me today and taking the time to answer some of these questions.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to have chatted.